Hey, what is up, guys? My name is Jody, this is Pickles. Welcome back to the channel.
Whoa, Jody, wrong channel, man, wrong channel. This is 24 hours at a time, not one more watch. And my name is Oleg, and this is Pickles. Wait, that's wrong. I mean, my name is Jody, and this is Bond. That's also wrong. God, what? I can't do the intro anymore. In today's video, we are finally going to do a head-to-head comparison between Tissel Marine Diver and Phoibos PY007C. Let's get into it. Alright guys, we're back with another comparison. This one I'm excited about. On the left hand side we have the Phoibos PY007C. This is the 2018 model, priced at $300 US. This is the most current version of this watch. On the right hand side here we have the Tissel Marine Diver. This is a late 2017 model. I'm not sure if this is the most recent version of, or if there is a more recent version of this watch available. Either way, this should give you a pretty good idea about each one of the watches. This is not a review. I did reviews for both of these watches. Those videos can be found on the channel. I will also link them in the description below, so you can check them out for a more detailed, in-depth look for each one of the watches. So let's start this comparison by looking at what's actually different about these two watches, because clearly they're very similar. I mean, they're both based on Rolex Submariner. Tisell, in my opinion, is a much stronger homage to a Rolex Submariner. However, the Phiobos here is also a very strong homage. So obviously, one of the biggest differences that you can see right away is the Cyclops. So the Tissel Marine Diver does have a Cyclops for the date. I gotta tell you, they did the Cyclops right. It magnifies the date properly. It looks like a Rolex. Number two, the bezels. So you can see here on the Phiobos, there is no lume pip, and actually the whole bezel is lumed. So it gives it kind of almost a yellow tone to the bezel and the writing on the bezel. Also, the font on the bezel is a bit thicker because, again, it is lumed. On the Tisell, it's a more traditional bezel. Both bezels are ceramic, but this one here does have a lume pip, and the font is slightly thinner. It's also a more white color as opposed to the Phiobos. Taking a closer look at the dials, and there is a slight difference in terms of the dial finish. I believe both of them have enamel dials. However, the Tisell has more of a matte look to the dial, so it has zero sunburst effect, versus Phiobos, in certain lighting conditions, it has a bit of a sunburst effect. As you can see here, kind of reflects light a little bit. Another big difference between the two dials is obviously the writing on the dials. Phiobos doesn't have Phiobos written by the 12 o'clock position. It just has the octopus logo, the Phiobos logo. At the bottom there it says divers 300 meters and automatic, and that's all the writing on the dial. I think it looks very clean. I actually prefer this design over the Tisell's design. Tisell obviously says Tisell by the 12 o'clock, underneath automatic, and then it says the Marine Diver and water resistant to 200 meters. So 300 meters of water resistance for Phiobos and 200 meters of water resistance for Tisell. Both watches have sapphire crystals and both are dead flat. Phiobos has more of a blue hue in the AR coating of the sapphire crystal, versus Tisell here doesn't have as much of a blue hue AR coating. I believe it still has the AR coating, but it doesn't give off that blue hue as the Phiobos does. So let's compare the two bezels. As I mentioned before, both bezels are ceramic. The Tisell doesn't have a lumed bezel. It's just a standard ceramic bezel. I know I'm saying standard ceramic bezel as if that many $250 or $230 watches have ceramic bezels. The bezel action is actually really good. Now, I gotta tell you, this action wasn't as good out of the box. I had to wear in this bezel, and with time it became very smooth and very satisfying as it is right now. Also, the bezel does align perfectly, which is a huge plus for the Tisell. The bezel on Phiobos is lumed. I will of course do a lume shot and a lume comparison between the two watches in a couple of minutes here. So, however, the grip on this bezel is not as good as Tisell. Tisell, in my opinion, is a bit easier to turn. Now this bezel here is a bit tight. It's not as smooth as Tisell, Normally I would give the negative points to Phiobos for that, but as I mentioned, Tisell at the beginning when I just got that watch was also a bit sticky and a bit tough to turn. Positive for this bezel is that it does align perfectly just like the Tisell. So which one of the watches has the better bezel? Tough question to answer if we're honest, because I prefer the look and the aesthetic of this Phiobos lumed bezel. However, the Tisell has better bezel action and better bezel grip. Moving on to the case finishes. Both watches have very similar case finishes. It's brushed on the top, polished on the side. However, I do think that Phiobos has slightly better finishes. Not by much, and maybe it's just because it's a newer watch and not as worn as the Tisell, but I think it has a bit of a better finish than the Tisell. Again, not a huge difference. You wouldn't notice if you didn't have the two watches side by side, but I think Phiobos has slightly better finishes. It definitely has better finishes on the bracelet. So yeah, the finishes on Phiobos just look better, they feel better, the steel feels a bit of a better quality. However, I do prefer the bracelet on the Tisell over the bracelet on the Phiobos. Even though Phiobos has better finishes, it has a very stiff bracelet that doesn't bend this way. So it's kind of weird when you put it on the desk. It makes a little pyramid. It's stiff, and also it doesn't taper as much. So it goes, I believe, from 20 to about 18. It's not a big taper, so not as comfortable as Tisell's bracelet. Tisell's bracelet is very flexible, and also it tapers quite a bit, so it goes from 20 to about 16 by the clasp, so it is more comfortable to wear in my opinion. Both watches have solid end links, both Tisell and Phiobos. However, Phiobos has push style pins versus Tisell here has this screw in pins. To be honest, the quality on these screw in pins is not the greatest. I would actually prefer the push style pins. Easier to adjust and in my opinion a little bit more secure versus these ones. I did have to tighten them a few times on the Tisell over the last year or so. The clasps on both watches are also different. So let's start with Phiobos. It has the engineered fold over clasp, very similar to a lot of other watches. The two pushers for the release, safety guard over, and Phiobos written across here. Really like this design of a clasp, simple, straight to the point. However, it does not have a diver's extension and only has the 3 micro adjustments. Looking at the clasp on Tisell, and it has more of a copy of a Rolex's clasp. So it closes like that, and then you have the guard over. You can see mine is a little bit beaten up because I did wear this watch quite a bit. This clasp here, I do prefer the design of the clasp on Phiobos. However, I do think this one here is a bit more practical, and also it does have that glide lock mechanism, again copied from Rolex with micro adjustments, so it makes it very easy to adjust it to your wrist, especially during the summer. If your wrist expands a little bit in the heat, you can really adjust it and get a perfect fit. Looking at the case back, Tisell just has this plain simple case back, just like Rolex Submariner, versus Phiobos has a bit more character. It is also a screw down case back, but it does have that Phiobos logo, the octopus with the crown, laser printed or laser etched in. Looks really cool, has some writing as well. I prefer the case back on Phiobos. Again, gives it a little bit more character, shows you that a little bit more work and design went into this watch. Both of the watches are powered by the same movement, the Miyota 9015. Fantastic movement for the money, high beat, no complaints, and both watches are extremely accurate. Both watches have super luminowa BGW lume. Let me pop a lume shot on the screen right now. So you can see the lume on both watches is about the same. However, I do have to give the edge to Phiobos because it does have that lumed bezel, which looks incredible in the dark. Both watches have the crown at the 3 o'clock position with the crown guards. Both crowns are signed. Tisell is signed with the T, and Phiobos is signed with the octopus logo, the Phiobos logo. Now, how's the crown action? Well, actually, I prefer Phiobos over Tisell by far. I think Phiobos has a very solid feeling crown and crown action. It feels like it's of a high quality, which is something that a lot of micro brands don't get right. And Tisell here, in my opinion, didn't get it quite right. If you watched the full review for this watch, you know that I actually had the broken crown on this watch in the second day of owning it, and I had to send it back to Tisell. They fixed it and they sent it back to me again. So whenever I have to wind the watch or whenever I have to set the time, I'm actually not really looking forward to it because the crown action on Tisell is not as solid. The crown itself doesn't feel as solid, and I'm always afraid to break it. It doesn't feel nearly as good as the Phiobos, so I gotta give points to Phiobos for the crown action. So which one of the watches do I prefer? Well, currently at $300 versus $230, I think Tisell wins over. I think Phiobos does provide a lot of value. That lumed bezel is amazing. The quality, in my opinion, is slightly better than Tisell, but $70 is quite a difference between the two watches, so I think I would choose Tisell because it is cheaper. However, if both watches were priced the same, I would choose Phiobos. I prefer this styling, I prefer this design, I prefer the lumed bezel. The quality is slightly higher. There are a lot of positives in Phiobos, so I would choose Phiobos if they were priced the same, but since they're not, Tisell is the winner. Alright guys, so that was the full comparison between Tissel Marine Diver and the Phoibos PY007C. If you're on a budget and want something that looks a lot like a Rolex Submariner, then Tissel Marine Diver is the right call. The finishes are great, the specs are pretty much the same as Phiobos, and it is cheaper by $70. Can't go wrong with that. If you want something a little bit different, something that has slightly better finishes, something that has a bit of a unique character, a bit of a distinct design, then go with the Phoibos PY007. Either one of the watches you choose, I don't think you will be disappointed. I appreciate you watching until the end, and big thank you to Jody from Just One More Watch for making that cameo at the beginning of the video. Just One More Watch, it's a small YouTube channel. I'm sure none of you have heard about it, but if you are curious, he does some amazing watch reviews. He does some amazing work on that channel. I'll of course link it in the description below. Also in the description below you will find the secret link. What the secret link is, basically, every week I search through eBay, through Amazon, through AliExpress, what have you, all kinds of different websites, and whenever I find a cool watch accessory, a cool watch, a unique watch, a watch on sale, something that's a good deal or something that I think you guys would find interesting, I will share in the description of the video, so that link will also be there. By the way, today on my wrist I'm wearing my Seiko SKX 009. I don't think I need to say anything else about this watch. I've discussed it so many times on my channel. Absolutely love this timepiece. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.